However, in the quiet that afterward, one name rang out more loudly than any other. It was a visitor's name, one anticipated, a specter from the past he tempted to remove. Who was this individual, and why did their tale linger in the end? Era in the life of Johnny Carson. And on January 23, 2005, the individual who had put America to sleep for 30 years, died. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, without a doubt, passed away visiting Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in silence in Los Angeles. The formal reason was breathing difficulties, a consequence of the he had been fighting. He was 79 years old, when Jeff Sotz, his nephew, issued a straightforward but forceful statement. He was in the company of his family, whose loss will be incalculable. The absence of a memorial service, the choice was startling yet entirely consistent with the character. For a man who was in the spotlight, performing in front of millions of people each evening, Johnny Carson was first. Dick, his friend and fellow host one time, Cavett remembers how socially Carson was uneasy. How would he strain simply to strike up a conversation with a small number of admirers outside the studio? Ed McMahon, his faithful sidekick for 30 years, renowned statement, Johnny was at ease. In the presence of 20 million individuals and utterly uneasy in front of 20, he was frequently referred to be the most private public figure in history. Thus, in death he received the seclusion he held. His remains were incinerated, and his wife, Alexis, received the ashes. Moss. There wouldn't be any with little space for his well-known friends and co-workers to exchange tales. The individual whose last performance was seen by 50 million people departed this planet with just a few. The entire globe wept in the soulways it might. Incoming tributes came from top positions. President George W. Bush described him as a dependable and comforting. His replacement, Jay Leno on the He, was dubbed the Gold on the Tonight Show. Norm, and the man David Letterman Carson considered himself to be his legitimate heir, provided maybe the most poignant homage. Said everyone who followed we won't witness anything like him once again. Supporters left notes and flowers on his Hollywood Walk of Fame star notoriety and at Johnny Carson Park on the other Sadethy block away from the NBC headquarters, where he had spent so much time creating magic. However, with how could there be a guest at a funeral? Additionally, in a life with thousands of acquaintances as well as some formidable adversaries, whose name was murmured following his passing would have been shocking. Everyone who is the answer was there, but who wasn't there for so long? The surprise visitor wasn't an individual who arrived that day. It was specter of a close connection and a searing betrayal that characterized the remainder of their lives. It was the one person Johnny Carson's story could never forgive. To comprehend conclusion, you must return to Prior to being a household, Joan Rivers was someone who struggled. Comedian. Early in the 1960s, she had been employed at seedy clubs for years in Greenwich Village, New York, passing a cab that occasionally didn't even arrive back. She had worked and slept in her car, temporary work to cover expenses, and even received prohibit in the Jagpar edition of the On appearance on The Tonight Show. She having tried out for the Johnny Carson Sivan attempts at The Tonight Show without success each and every time. By 1965, at only 31 years old, a lot of people in the field were reminding her that her professional life was already over. The night of February then arrived. 17th of 1965, a booking of Mercy was made, something that was organized by her management as off of her because he was Bill's representative as well. Cosby Rivers appeared on That's certain that it was her final opportunity. However, an amazing thing occurred. She subsequently remembered it was one of those evenings when everything goes according to plan. The alignment of the stars with the we just bonded audience. She was electric, hilarious, and Theon, somebody who was most important, observed it. When her set was over, she took a seat on the Johnny, the host's coveted couch. Carson leaned closer and uttered those words would permanently alter her life. He informed her on national television. Rivers said, "You're going to be a star." Recalled glancing over her shoulder, wondering to whom he might be speaking. She discussed the synergy that exists on air between they are utterly enchanted. In Thatanstan, a connection was made. Carson didn't give her a break, please. He turned into her champion, her guide. In her own words, throughout the years he gave me much. After that evening, Joan Rivers frequently appeared on The Tonight Show. She made around 100 appearances throughout the following 20 years. Their banter on air was renowned. He was the cool one, unchallengeable monarch, and she was the shrewd, funny court jester with the ability to. He laughed heartily till he started crying. There was genuine faith in her. As soon as Rivers started her own brief daytime in 1968, Johnny Carson was her talk show host. First celebrity visitor, a huge demonstration of assistance. Her part in the programme continued to grow. She started to step in as a replacement host at Carson Schlade, and by 1983, she was formally designated as the programme's permanentist host. This was a role of enormous faith. During Johnny's absence, she had the keys to the kingdom. She was in the public's perception in the waiting industry, and the queen. There was unwavering devotion to Carson. She thereafter claimed to have gotten numerous proposals to present her own show on but consistently rejected them. to continue watching The Tonight Show. However, this is the little thing that makes all the difference. For all of their kindness on air, their friendship was it was present beneath the scorching lighting from the studio and in front of the. According to Rivers herself, orphanship was only depicted on camera in ahead of the United States. Additionally, even at that time, during when the commercial ends, the red when the light went out, we were at a loss for words, one another. This wasn't because they disapproved of one another. It was due to Carson's renowned coldness. He was a man who surrounded himself with walls. They didn't have a close friendship pals that shared their secrets with one another. It was a hierarchy of professionals. He was the king, the patron, who had learnt and granted her a position in his court. Furthermore, that unsaid power dynamic is the secret to comprehending the ruthless treachery that was coming. Midway through the 1980s, the ground started beneath Joan Rivers' feet to feel shaky. For many years, she had felt comfortable in her position as Carson's number 2. However, things began to shift. Carson signed a new contract in 1985. NBC deal for 2 years. Rivers' but was only given a 1 year. The message was obvious to her. She could only mean one thing. The author wrote, "The authorities weren't sure about my future." Then the larger blow struck. A memo started to circulate at the NBC listing the comedians' names under considerators, potential long-term substitutes for when Johnny finally made the decision to take a break. Rivers, with more logs, more time spent in the chair than anyone else, Johnny thought that her name would rank first on the list. However, when she was devastated to see it, her name wasn't in it at all. She experienced a painful conclusion. NBC would never provide give a woman the host seat. She recognized her role. Serving as a guest host was a secure method for the network in order to utilize her skills without ever seeing her as a serious rival or the king's successor. At this time, precisely the point at when the player started playing a baby fox, the network was getting ready to launch, and its leaders, such as Barry Diller, desired to create a massive splash. They went up to Joan Rivers with an offer that could not be turned down: The Late Show. Her own late-night talk show. Joan Rivers is the star of the show. The program will be broadcast within the same time window, across the street from The Tonight Show, and the pay was an incredible $10 million. Far more than she was earning at NBC. Rivers had to deal with an excruciating. She was devoted to Johnny. Though she felt the man who had created her disregarded and abandoned by the network for which he was employed. Her spouse, Edgar Rosenberg, her manager, handed her some important counsel. He advised her not to speak Carson a word till the agreement with Fox was finalized and signed. His reasoning was predicated on harsh Hollywood reasoning. Other comedians who were frequented The Tonight Show and left to begin competing performances were frequently atomically prohibited from participating in Carson's initiative. If she informed Johnny, and then, for some, the Fox agreement fell through. Logic. She might end up with nothing. Worse yet, they were both afraid that the Carson, renowned for his strength, could create one kill-her deal with a simple phone call, prior to it ever occurring. Thus, she maintains lent a choice she would eventually make for the rest of her life. She felt regret. The weekend before to the official announcement, word got out. What transpired next is totally dependent on who you think. That two entirely different various versions of the story surfaced. As stated, Joan Rivers was appalled by the fact that Tit was someone else who told him. She tried calling him right away to describe. "I finally got him on," she remarked. The phone, and informed him of her departure to anchor her own Fox program. He said nothing. He simply hung up. She dialed back, assuming they were. He briefly hung up on her. Time. That was it. They would never talk again. The version provided by Johnny Carson was radically different. According to him, that phone of the call never took place. He informed individuals that he was made aware of her new program by a new statement, similar to the others in the world. He was caught completely off guard, attacked and deceived by the individual he had fought for more than 2 decades. Why was his response really that severe? Another man. Comedians departed to pursue their own careers. Displays. And although there may have been, Carson had frequently given them his. According to Rivers' view, one that went well beyond mere professional contest. Later she stated, "I believe he felt strongly because I was a woman. I simply owned that I wouldn't abandon him. I believe it was inquiry about how I found you and that you are my." That didn't sit well with him as a. I confronted him. A man leaving Carson's world to compete was a desire. A woman who was departing was the monarch had been disobeyed, and his anger would come quickly. And Johnny Carson, the most influential figure on television, utilized his influence to discipline her in all manners. Heckled. The first and most evident the result was that she was instantly barred from The Tonight for good display for the remainder of Carson's employment, and she continued to do so for years after he retired. Refused to enter the studio that had been her home away from home. However, it went a lot beyond that. What did Carson create? Essentially constituted a blacklist. Anyone who appeared on The Late Show as a guest. Joan Rivers, the celebrity, was informed that they would no longer accept it on the evening display. For famous people and their representatives, it was an easy decision. You could continue. The upstart's faltering new show connect with others, or use the most significant and potent performance in history of television. Nearly Al Carson was selected. Rivers almost discovered it. A-list guests are tough to book. An NBC executed one of her close friends, claimed to have warned her directly, "We are destined to ruin you." The Late Show debuted on October 9, 1986, and encountered difficulties almost quickly. Absent well-known visitors and confronting the Carson's full power of ratings, the program struggled to keep up with scenes. It was terrible. Edgar Rivers' spouse was the show's producer, and I were in continual conflict with officials from Fox. Less than the network awarded Joan Ang terminate her spouse Shedikland. Consequently, Fox fired both of them. The humiliation in the workplace was enormous, but it would soon be eclipsed by an unfathomable The show's failure thermos debts they had accrued, as well as the unbearable strain was caused by the public downfall. On her union. 3 months following their Edgar Rosenberg took his own once they were discharged. Life. At her lowest point in life, Joan Rivers was by herself. Her career was in ruins. Her spouse what? Additionally, throughout everything, the Monwar had previously been her strongest ally. The only sound was quiet. Carson Johnny never gave a call. He didn't write a note. Who never used a single phrase to convey my sympathies. This one action, or absence of, and changed the conflict from a hostile Hollywood conflict, becomes a very sinister and terrible tale. It showed an aspect of Carson that his devoted followers never saw. A man with such a deep-seated resentment that triumphed over any conventional sense or empathy, as Rivers would subsequently see, explaining her total seclusion from her former dominion. It was as if I had been transported to Siberia by Stalin. The king's sentence was completed, and it weighs up. Let's go back to that now. January 2005, a calm day. As news of Johnny Carson's passing circulated, the tally of his protracted, unsolved conflict with among the earliest was Joan Rivers. That's what everyone thought. She was his legacy's haunting spirit, though the master of control has one loose end that could never bind together. Without actual funeral, her tale turned into the he never received a eulogy. She was the unexpected visitor. Her response to his passing was as difficult and unfiltered as their past. There was no easy declaration of sorrow. Rather, her public comments were a complex blend of persistent and severe pain, and an unexpected dressed on a professional level. In one interview, she was frank and nasty, referring to him as a cruel son of Ain. The following sentence. She would say thought he was the smartest of any straight man. He is not touched. The agony persisted even after almost 20 years of stillness. She didn't express regret for taking the Fox show, although she did lament the chance seeking grace that Carson had thrown away. In an interview conducted just prior to her own death, she pictured a different conclusion of their tale. What Johnny should have done, she responded. Following my departure from the show and following my dismissal from Fox and following since Edgar killed himself, Johnny had brought me back to the program and stated to where you been. I asked it would have medialed the newspapers and we should have medialed immediately. It would have been a forgiveness moment, elegant motion from the most elegant man on TV. However, it never took place. Even years later, Rivers was still looking for him after his death, for a sense of closure. During a show, Joan and Melissa from her reality show, Joan Knows Best, she visited the cemetery where Carson's ashes went. The cameras trailed behind her as she'd attempted to confront the man who had removed her from his life, saying finally to the empty air, tragic attempt at reconciliation for this reason. Joan Rivers was the real visitor at the funeral of Johnny Carson, although he had withdrawn into his fierce reprobate sphere upon retirement in 1992. Never discussing the conflict in public, she was compelled to coexist with the upon repercussions. For decades, she was their only historian. Strained bond. Sharing her perspective on the narrative during interviews and performance space, there was only silence on his side. After he passed away, her voice and the loudest echoes of his pain were hers. Previous, the surprise visitor wasn't a standing in a place of worship. It was the tragic inevitable. An unforgettable erectal of the one individual he developed and the one he would never be able to forgive ultimately. Johnny Carson received the quiet he always wanted to leave. There wasn't a public display, no imposing monument, but quiet was broken by the tale of the one he would never be able to forgive. The most surprising visitor at the conclusion of, instead of being a person, his life was a record, reminiscent of a friendship hemmed using just one sentence, and the sound of a telephone click ruined it.